The rain fell in heavy sheets, drenching the pavement as Liam stood outside his parents' house, his clothes soaked, his body shivering from the cold. His fists pounded against the wooden door, each knock growing weaker, his voice hoarse from shouting. "Mom, please, just let me talk. I have nowhere to go." But the house remained silent. Only the sound of rain filled the air. His fingers trembled as he reached for the doorknob, but just as he did, the porch light flicked off, and his heart sank. They were still inside. They just weren't going to open the door. A lump formed in his throat as memories from earlier that night flashed through his mind. The cold stares, the harsh words, the way his mother crossed her arms, her expression void of sympathy. "We've made our decision, Liam," she had said, her voice like steel. "You're useless to this family. We're done wasting money on you. You dropped out of college. You can't hold a job," his father had added, shaking his head in disappointment. "We can't keep carrying your dead weight. We gave you time. We gave you chances," his mother continued. "Jacob is going to law school, and we need to focus on him. You're nothing but a disappointment." Then came the final blow, the door slamming in his face, the lock clicking into place, sealing his fate. Now, standing alone in the freezing rain, Liam felt his knees weaken. His home, his family, had turned their backs on him. His breaths came in uneven gasps as he turned away from the house, stepping off the porch and into the muddy streets. His shoes sank into the wet ground with every step, his body growing heavier with the weight of abandonment. A few days ago, he had still held on to hope. He remembered sitting at the dinner table, shifting uncomfortably as his parents stared at him across their expensive mahogany dining set. His father's voice had been laced with impatience as he asked, "So, have you found a job yet?" Liam had tried to explain, tried to tell them that he was applying, that he was doing his best, but the words barely left his mouth before his mother cut him off. "Need what, Liam? More excuses? More time? We're sick of it." And then Jacob, his older brother, had laughed. "Maybe you should have thought of that before flunking out of college." Liam had clenched his fists under the table, swallowing back the anger rising in his chest. They never listened. They never cared why he had struggled. They didn't know about the panic attacks, the sleepless nights, the weight of always feeling like a disappointment. And now, here he was, homeless, broke, and alone. The city streets stretched before him, dark and unwelcoming. He had nowhere to go. No money for a motel, no friends to call. He walked aimlessly through the rain, his vision blurring from the tears mixing with the downpour. When exhaustion finally took hold, he found himself in a narrow alleyway, his back pressed against the cold brick wall as he slid down onto the damp concrete. His breath came in shaky gasps, his soaked clothes clinging to his skin. His body ached, but the pain in his chest was far worse. "They really don't love me." The thought was a whisper in his mind, a quiet realization that stung deeper than the cold. As the rain continued to fall around him, Liam closed his eyes, letting the darkness swallow him whole. Liam woke to the sound of city life stirring around him. Honking cars, distant sirens, hurried footsteps splashing through puddles. His body ached from the cold, his clothes still damp from the rain. The alley he had collapsed in the night before reeked of garbage and gasoline, and a gnawing pain twisted in his stomach. Hunger. He pulled his knees to his chest, shivering as he watched people pass by, completely oblivious to him. Just yesterday, he had a bed, a roof over his head. Now, he was nothing more than a shadow, an invisible figure blending into the cracks of the city. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Liam forced himself to stand. His limbs felt heavy, stiff from the unforgiving pavement. He needed food, but without money, there were few options. The thought of begging made his stomach turn, but desperation was a cruel teacher. He made his way to a busy street corner, watching other homeless men sit with signs, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. He hesitated before lowering himself onto the sidewalk, avoiding their stares. The first hour passed in unbearable silence. People walked by without sparing him a glance. Some even crossed the street to avoid him. Each rejection stung like a fresh wound. The shame burned in his chest, but he forced himself to stay put. Then, just as he was about to give up, a small, wrinkled hand extended toward him. An elderly woman in a worn coat dropped a few crumpled dollar bills into his lap, her gaze filled with something he hadn't seen in days: kindness. "You'll get through this, son," she murmured before walking away. Liam clutched the money, his vision blurring. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like hope. He used the few dollars to buy a cheap sandwich from a corner store, eating it so fast that his stomach cramped. The hunger was relentless, but at least for now, it was quieted. Days passed, each blending into the next. He learned to find shelter under awnings when it rained, to search for half-eaten food discarded near cafes, to sleep with one eye open to avoid being robbed. But the hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold, it was the loneliness. The city had turned its back on him, just like his family had. But Liam refused to break. One evening, as he sat on the steps of a library, trying to escape the bitter wind, a voice interrupted his thoughts. First time on the streets, Liam turned to see an older man, his face lined with years of hardship. His clothes were just as ragged as Liam's, but there was wisdom in his tired eyes. He introduced himself as Walter. Walter had been homeless for years, but unlike most, he had learned how to survive. He knew which shelters gave out the best meals, where to find places to wash up, and how to avoid trouble. For the first time since being abandoned, Liam wasn't alone. Liam never imagined he would call the streets home, but as days turned into weeks, he adapted. Walter became his guide, teaching him the unspoken rules of survival. They ate at soup kitchens, scavenged for odd jobs, and found warmth in each other's company. But Liam wanted more than survival. He wanted a way out. One evening, as he wandered through the city, he stopped outside a cafe. Through the glass, he saw businessmen in crisp suits, sipping coffee, typing on sleek laptops. Their world felt unreachable, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. That's when he noticed a discarded newspaper on a bench nearby. The front page read, "Self-made millionaire shares how he turned $100 into a fortune." His fingers tightened around the paper. If someone else could do it, why couldn't he? The next morning, he made his way to the public library. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the biting wind outside, and the rows of books stretched endlessly before him. He found a vacant computer station and sat down, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was he even looking for? He started with the basics: investment strategies, online businesses, financial growth. The words blurred together at first, but he forced himself to focus. Hours passed as he devoured information, scribbling notes on scraps of paper. Walter noticed the change in him. "What's got you so worked up, kid?" he asked one night as they huddled near a heating grate. Liam hesitated before answering. "I don't want this to be my life forever." Walter chuckled, shaking his head. "Then make sure it isn't." Liam took those words to heart. He saved every penny from odd jobs, sweeping sidewalks, washing car windows, anything that paid. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After months of learning and hustling, he made his first online investment. It was a risk. He could lose everything, but he had nothing left to lose. And then, something incredible happened. He took online courses, studied about starting a business, and wasn't going to give up until he got what he wanted. Liam refreshed the page, his heart pounding. The small investment he had made weeks ago had doubled. It wasn't a fortune, not yet, but it was proof that he was onto something. For the first time in months, hope flickered inside him. He threw himself into learning, spending every free moment at the library. He read about stocks, cryptocurrency, and digital markets, absorbing knowledge like a man starving for more than just food. He watched online courses, studied about starting a business, and wasn't going to give up until he got what he wanted. Walter watched with quiet amusement. Never seen someone so obsessed with numbers before, he mused one evening. But Liam wasn't just obsessed, he was determined. The money he made from small investments was reinvested, growing steadily. Soon, he had enough to rent a cheap motel room. Sleeping in a bed for the first time in months felt surreal, but he didn't let comfort slow him down. He launched a website, offering financial tips based on what he had learned. His story, homeless man trying to make it in the investment world, started gaining attention online. People were intrigued by his journey, and little by little, he built a following. The money started flowing in. Within a year, he had enough to start his own business. No more sleeping in the cold. No more scrounging for food. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something. Walter was the first person he helped. "You don't have to live on the streets anymore," Liam told him, handing over a set of keys. It was to a small apartment, nothing fancy, but warm and safe. Walter blinked in disbelief, then pulled him into a tight embrace. "Proud of you, kid," he murmured. Liam had done the impossible. He had risen from nothing, but fate had one last twist waiting for him. Liam never looked back. He built his company from the ground up, expanding into multiple industries, investments, tech startups, and real estate. Within 5 years, he had become one of the youngest billionaires in the country. His name started appearing in business magazines. Interviews flooded in. People wanted to know how a homeless man had turned his life around. And then, one day, his past came knocking. Liam was in his office, overlooking the city skyline, when his assistant walked in, looking hesitant. "Sir, there are 2 people downstairs asking to see you." Liam barely glanced up. "I don't do walk-ins." "Who are they?" The assistant hesitated before answering. "They say they're your parents." Time stopped. Liam felt his breath catch in his throat. His grip tightened on the pen in his hand. He hadn't seen them in years, not since the night they threw him out like trash. Now they were here? A cold, bitter realization settled in his chest. They must have seen the articles, the news segments, the photos of him shaking hands with CEOs. They knew who he had become, and they wanted something. Taking a slow breath, Liam straightened his suit and stood. "Send them in." Moments later, the door opened, and there they were, his mother and father, looking older, but still carrying the same air of superiority. But there was something else in their eyes now. Desperation. His mother was the first to speak. "Liam, sweetheart, it's been so long." Liam didn't respond. He simply watched them, waiting. His father cleared his throat. We saw you on the news. We didn't know you had done so well for yourself. We're proud of you, son." Proud. The word felt foreign coming from them. His mother forced a smile. "We were thinking, maybe it's time we put the past behind us. We're still family, after all." Liam exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving theirs. He knew exactly what this was. They didn't regret abandoning him. They regretted abandoning a billionaire. They weren't here for him. They were here for his money. Liam leaned back in his chair, studying the 2 people who had once been his parents. They looked nervous under his gaze, shifting uncomfortably, waiting for him to respond. "You want to put the past behind us?" he finally said, his voice calm but firm. "The past where you threw me out into the streets like garbage." His mother flinched, but his father quickly recovered, forcing a chuckle. "Son, we were just trying to push you to do better. Look at you now. It worked, didn't it?" Liam's jaw clenched. He had expected them to make excuses, to twist the story in their favor, but hearing it still stung. "You think you made me successful?" His voice was colder now. You think abandoning me was some kind of lesson? His mother sighed, placing a hand over her chest. Liam, times were tough, and we had to focus on your brother. But we missed you. We love you. Liam let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Love. He met their eyes, his expression unreadable. Tell me, did you love me when I was starving on the streets? When I had nowhere to sleep? When I was begging strangers for food? Silence. His mother swallowed hard. His father shifted uncomfortably. I lost everything. Liam continued, his voice steady. And you never once looked for me. Never called. Never cared. His father sighed, rubbing his temple. We're here now, aren't we? Yes, Liam said, tilting his head. Now that I have money. Their faces paled. That's not. His mother started, but Liam held up a hand, cutting her off. Let's not pretend, he said. You don't regret what you did. You regret that you abandoned a billionaire. They had nothing to say to that. Liam exhaled slowly, then leaned forward. I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you, but for me. Because I refused to let your betrayal poison my future. Hope flickered in their eyes. His mother even smiled. But then Liam continued. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconnection. It doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean you get to waltz back into my life because it's convenient for you now. The color drained from his mother's face. Liam, please. We're your parents. No, Liam said softly, standing up. You were my parents. But you made your choice. Now, you have to live with it. He walked past them, pressing a button on his desk. The office door swung open, and his assistant appeared. Show them out, Liam said without looking back. His father's face twisted in anger. His mother's eyes filled with tears. But Liam didn't turn around. He had finally closed the door on his past. And for the first time in his life, he felt free. Liam didn't watch as his parents were escorted out of his office. He kept his back to them, staring out at the city skyline. He had spent years dreaming of this moment, of confronting them, of making them feel even a fraction of the pain they had caused him. But now that it had happened, there was no satisfaction, no triumph, only closure. His assistant returned a few moments later. They're gone, sir. Liam nodded, but he didn't respond. His thoughts were elsewhere. His mother's tearful eyes. His father's frustrated silence. They had come expecting to manipulate him, to guilt him into letting them back in. And for a moment, he had wondered, had hoped, that maybe they truly regretted what they had done. But their eyes had told a different story. They weren't heartbroken over losing him. They were heartbroken over losing access to his success. And that was a pain they would have to live with. Days passed, and Liam threw himself back into his work. But despite everything, the encounter with his parents lingered in his mind. He didn't hate them. He had no interest in revenge. But he did want to make sure no one else suffered the way he had. So, he did what they never did. He helped. He expanded his charity work, funding shelters, education programs, and job training for the homeless. He created scholarships for struggling students, ensuring that no one would be discarded the way he had been. One afternoon, as he visited a shelter he had helped build, he saw Walter, sitting among a group of younger men, sharing stories and advice. Walter caught his eye and grinned. "Look at you, kid. Changing the world." Liam smiled. Trying to. He could never change the past. But he could shape the future. And that was worth more than any revenge could ever be. Liam stood outside the shelter, watching as people came and went, some looking for help, others offering it. This place had become a symbol of everything he had built, everything he had overcome. He had spent years trying to prove himself, to show the world, and maybe even his parents, that he was worth something. But now, he realized he had never needed their validation. He had already won. His phone buzzed in his pocket. When he pulled it out, he saw an unread message from an unknown number. "Mom, we just wanted to say we're sorry. If you ever change your mind, we're here." Liam stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, he deleted the message. He had already made his choice. Without looking back, he slipped his phone into his pocket and walked down the street, disappearing into the city he once thought had swallowed him whole. But now it was his city, his world, his future, and for the first time, he was exactly where he was meant to be.